Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So as usual, if you are interested in personality themed merch, you can check out the t-shirts and hoodies down in the link below. And also I have revamped my Patreon account. If you want the details of what I post and what exclusive benefits you can get, you can check out the intro video and definitely follow me on my IG account's personality story. I have put it up on the screen for you to take note of. And today I'm going to be talking about my thoughts and experiences with the INTJ personality, which is one of my favorite intuitive types and definitely one of my overall favorite MBTI type. The first point that I want to talk about is really about this special power that they have, and by special power I mean that their ability to kind of really disregard the opinions of society and the group. And by this regard, I don't mean that they necessarily dismiss all opinions, but it's more like they're able to be very, very authentic to themselves without worrying about the opinions of others or letting it affect them in any significant way. And this is something that I feel like society kind of downplays and doesn't really quite promote, because obviously society is run on external validation. You see that on social media, you see that like everywhere in the ads. People are kind of wired to care about the opinions of other people, sometimes to a very obsessive degree. Like even if we don't want to seem that way, we still are very easily influenced by the world around us. And with the whole social media thing and even YouTube, there's like likes and dislikes and the algorithm and so on. So it's like we really care about how the world perceives us and about popularity and all these things. And obviously I'm trying not to look at that too much for this channel as well, because I do want to speak my truth. But at the same time, it's like it's hard not to care when you're surrounded by that. But I think INTJs really have this like special power where they're able to be very centered on their own self, like they know themselves. And so even if there are a lot of people, and usually there are, because INTJs are one of the most misunderstood personalities out there, there will be a lot of negative voices, and there will be even like very harsh criticism or disagreements with the INTJs like way of being. But they are always able to conduct themselves confidently. They are always able to be assertive with their own beliefs and their own thoughts. They will not easily back down, and they're not easily influenced by like this group mentality of how you should think, how you should feel, how you should act. They're pretty much very grounded in themselves, and I think this is a very enviable traits, because as an INFJ, even though I do have this need to be like true to myself, and I also care about maintaining my own beliefs and thoughts and being confident in expressing them, I feel like I don't do it as well as the INTJs, because even as much as I try, these things like that people say about me or opinions of the group can still affect me pretty negatively. And even though I don't let them change me, I am still definitely a lot more affected by them than the INTJ personalities. So one example is that in high school, I remember there's definitely a lot of issues with like fitting in. They would act in their most authentic way, and they're really not afraid of judgment. Like one of them would ask a lot of questions during class, even though that is seen as annoying by some other students, and she just does it, and it's like the whole school kind of is able to see that she is different, but because of the way she conducts herself, I feel like people don't mess with her. She's just so sure of herself in terms of her own way of being that generally I don't think even people who don't like her, they still respect her to a certain degree because of the way that she presents herself. And I think that for especially NF types, even though we do try to be true to ourselves, we do get affected negatively and sometimes we can present ourselves in a less confident way or let that affect our self-worth, and that is really quite a tragedy, honestly. I definitely think that people can learn from the INTJs in terms of maintaining their own self-worth and not relying on external validation for telling them who they are or telling them how they should act. Other points that I want to talk about when it comes to the INTJ personality is a common misunderstanding that because they are so rational, they're not able to, care for anybody. And to which I would say, definitely when it comes to what the group thinks or what the community thinks, they can be very detached. So even if they find it annoying or frustrating, they don't tend to be very, very hurt by that. Or at least this is how I perceive them. Like, I'm not an INTJ, so I can't really speak for exactly how they feel. But when I'm being misunderstood, I tend to be a lot more hurt by it. Whereas they tend to just be very annoyed, not necessarily very emotionally impacted by the opinions of like strangers or acquaintances. However, INTJs do have things that they do care about, and these are referring to like opinions of people whom they themselves are close to. So it can be subjective. So maybe some INTJs can care about like what their father thinks of them, and some INTJs can care about, what a significant other talks about them, and some it can be their close friends. But every INTJ I know, they do care about some people's opinions, and they typically are very selective over like who they care about and what kind of opinions they value. And so among their close circle of like friends or family or whatever, they can really be having this very strong like sensitive side showing, and this can surprise a lot of people because it is a very huge contrast to the cold rational side that you usually would see, and sometimes that can come up in a very unhealthy way. So for example, I do have like experiences with INTJ friends, especially INTJ females. They tend to be sometimes accidentally over invested in relationships because, especially from a younger time when they are not really very developed in the feeling apartment, maybe like in the introverted feeling side, and they get into a relationship and suddenly their introverted feeling is like activated. And so they can really kind of lose themselves because they are used to being so rational, and suddenly they have this like outpour of emotions in a very internal like introverted feeling way, and they can really lose like direction with how they are going to deal with it. The problem with this is they can actually get into toxic dynamics if they're not careful. So they may be used by someone or just get themselves really hurt in a relationship if they are unable to regulate their feelings, because it is a very all or nothing situation. But I think that once they, it takes time for them to gain that emotional maturity, and once they are more balanced, once they are able to find more people to invest emotionally instead of just investing in one person as their only outlets, they would really be like a lot more healthy and a lot better at managing emotions. So another point about INTJs is, people often see them as being very stubborn and like strong-headed when it comes to opinions. And yes, I would agree to a certain degree that the way that they present their opinions in like even normal discussions, they can seem like they're debating. And this is not necessarily like they are actually, this is not necessarily intentional. I think that this is just how they express themselves. Like they always seem to be debating someone even if they're not, because this is probably due to their extroverted thinking function being their second function. ENTPs can seem that way too, but ENTPs do it in a more lighthearted, like almost goofy way. But INTJs can seem intimidating when they do debate someone. because the NI makes them seem very aloof and the extrovert thinking makes them seem very combative. However, I think that when you actually get time to talk to the INTJ in a more maybe like extended period of time, and you get to discuss ideas with them, you would realize that they are not nearly as unchangeable and headstrong as you may first think. Because INTJs, when they first talk about their opinions, they can be very assertive and very strong, and that can throw some people off balance, that can really intimidate some people. However, if you actually talk to them, if you actually accept the way that they express themselves, and you present a very good opinion that they themselves find convincing, they can actually change their opinion pretty fast. But the thing is, you have to convince them. So for INTJs, I realized that they don't really hold on to their opinions emotionally the way that a lot of NFs do. Like NFs tend to be a lot more emotionally attached to their opinions because sometimes that can be like a part of their values and so on. But INTJs tend to be less emotionally bonded to their opinions. So if you can convince them in a make sense kind of way, like if your argument is not sloppy and if you can let them see a different perspective, they would actually appreciate it. They would actually agree with you and change their opinion once they are convinced. And so I feel like it is not really that they cannot ever change their opinion on something. It's just that you have to present it in a way that makes sense to them and click with them. And so I find that, once an INTJ hears an opinion that they find interesting, they would actually be almost instantaneous in accepting it. They don't really take a long time to think about, oh my gosh, should I change this opinion because my opinion is so, close to me. They don't really have that kind of inner fight. They just change it if they find it a good one. So discussions with INTJs does not really need to be this, you are always right, I'm always wrong kind of dynamic, even though it seems that way in the beginning. But like I said, as long as you are able to phrase yourself well and you're able to present a very good, convincing perspective, they would be quite inclined to accept this new way of thinking. So another thing about INTJs is a similarity that I kind of observed between them and me. And this is about how they basically go about their inferior extroverted sensing. So typically I feel like INTJs have similar problems with INFJs when it comes to accepting failure. And INTJs do not like to fail. Of course, no type likes to fail, but INTJs are pretty scared of failure and they can be very paralyzed by failure. I do have a INTJ friend who was talking to me about it, and she said that she can sometimes not start on a certain paper or a project if she doesn't feel confident about it. She cannot get a single word out. And self-doubt is definitely one of the biggest challenges in the INFJ and INTJ personality when it comes to getting started on projects. And even though INTJs can be very productive, they can be very efficient because of their creative function being extroverted thinking, they need that initial drive and motivation to really get started. And their NI can really get in the way of that because INTJs can be very pessimistic if it is something that they feel like they're not very competent at, or they feel like they're not good enough to do well. And that may not even be a fact. It can just be their own self-image about a certain task. And if they do have that mindset, then it is really difficult for them to even get started. And obviously, if you don't try, your chance of succeeding is zero. This is very huge contrast to the SE DOM personalities who are very, very capable of failing multiple times. They can just fail 100 and get up on the next fall. they are very used to it. They're very used to the idea of failing. And I think INTJs are not used to the idea. And that can actually be a pity because they are capable of great things if only they are more confident in their own abilities. And even though they seem confident on the outside, there are things that they do question themselves on in their own like competencies, because they do have a very high standard to kind of account to. And so this is really about how they can moderate that and to learn to perform tasks without overthinking it or being overly pessimistic about how it can turn out. So the last point that I want to talk about is regarding like my friendship with INTJs. My friendship with INTJs tend to be definitely not as emotionally connected when it comes to my fellow feeling friends, because when it comes to feeler types, I feel like it is easier for us to connect on an emotional level because we naturally are able to showcase emotion and to really connect on maybe sending each other emotional support or being very constant in our communication, especially with the FE types. However, with INTJs, I feel like it's more of a distance kind of concern, where we would definitely contact each other and we would meet up like once in a while, but it is not really necessarily consistent because INTJs are very driven people, and if they do have a certain ambition that they want to go for, everything else can kind of take a backseat if they are in the career ambition phase of their lives. And to me, that's okay because I understand the way that their personality are. And I think with INTJs, you cannot expect them to behave like a feeler. You cannot expect them to care for you in the way that an FE user cares for you. And I used to kind of, see that as a negative thing because I was confused. I was like, why do they not show as much like outward affection compared to my feeling friends? But later I understand that this is just the way that they are as people. It's not like anything personal, but they do show that they care through actions, and they do show it through words as well. Once they are more developed in the introverted feeling side, they do seem more considerate, and it's actually make things a lot easier between us once they develop the feeling side. But still, obviously, compared to like the feeling types, they are not as outwardly emotional and warm, and that is just to be accepted. I think that overall we still have a pretty strong connection because they can really understand where I'm coming from. And this is not easy for me because obviously as an NI Dom, it's not very common for me to find other NI Doms out there. And I'm also an Enneagram 5, so I do like to kind of share my opinions sometimes on social media, and I realize that they will be the only ones liking it because they get it, and not everyone can kind of get it. So I hope that you enjoyed the video and learn more about this type. I will see you soon. Bye.